Somebody up here at the front just made an interesting point. I can't remember. I think it was Whitney just said they all look the same. Like their biographies are all the same. So tell me, like, what kind of things are you seeing that is typical of a current Supreme Court justice? Okay, so they're Ivy League educated. Okay, what else? Okay, so they have a law background. So if you look and you turn to Article 3 of the Constitution, there are 0 qualifications to be a federal judge. We have an age and a citizenship requirement for the president. We have an age and a length of citizenship requirement for Congress and residency. There is not a single qualification to be a federal judge. It says you have to be of good behavior and you serve for life. That's it. So I can be a federal judge, Tug can be a federal judge, Brian can be a federal, anybody can be on the Supreme Court. There's no qualification except that the president has to appoint you and the Senate has to confirm you. Okay? Okay? Yet, you guys are telling me that all of these people were Ivy League educated and they all have a law background. Okay? What else are you noticing?
They all have like really high grades.
Okay? They were good students. Okay? And they're academics. Is that good to say? They're kind of like, they definitely function in this very academic world. Did you notice religion on there at all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like what religions did y'all stood out to you? Okay, there are quite a few Catholics. Several of them are Jewish. Okay.
I noticed that before they were talking about when someone, Kennedy, I think,
Uh-huh.
when Reagan was trying to appoint him, he was trying to appoint Bork, if that's how you say it, but he was too conservative for the Supreme Court.
At the time, yeah. And that was what you guys had read about last night.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe they do have to have, maybe not so extreme. Okay, so currently, if you, okay, so how should we say that? Maybe not as ideological, you think? More moderate. Now, I'm going to say more moderate than maybe members of Congress. Okay, because we definitely have like a couple of our justices are still very kind of at opposite ends of the political spectrum, but their opinions are probably more moderated than say like some of the people that are in Congress. Brian, which
I have a question.
Yeah.
On Justice Kennedy,
Mhm.
it said that if they believed that if Bork had actually been the one who received the role, that they would have reversed Roe v. Wade by now.
Probably.
What is Roe v. Wade?
It was the decision for abortion that said abortion was acceptable in the first trimester of pregnancy.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can see like why that became so contentious. Okay. All right, here's my question. Just like when we looked at the demographic background of Congress and we said, well, Congress represents us, they don't look like us. Does this look like America to you? Right?
Maybe in a few years.
Okay. Ethnically, there is diversity. We have some ethnic diversity. We have a little bit of religious diversity. We have, certainly like both genders are represented. But in terms of like the kind of decisions the court makes, do you see why sometimes it might be hard for average Americans to sit with the decisions that the court makes?
Yeah.
Think about the factors that influence your decision making. Your education, your academic background, your religion, your marital status, where you live in the country, like all of those demographics that cause us to be socialized the way we are, well, this socializes them. There was a vacancy on the court when W was in office. Actually, Sandra Day O'Connor resigned, and she was the first woman on the court. So I think he felt really compelled to appoint another woman, and he suggested a woman named Harriet Miers. Harriet Miers was a very well-respected attorney from the Dallas area. She went to SMU Law School. She's been very active. She has like this great resume. She has never been a judge. And the minute he nominated her, members of the Senate were like, absolutely no way. Are you kidding me? She's never been a judge. She's never been a federal judge, not a state judge. We have no idea what kind of decisions she's going to make. And like she withdrew her nomination. She said, forget it. But it showed, and they also criticized she only went to SMU Law School, which is a great law school, but it's not an Ivy League law school. And the reality is we do kind of have a little bit of elitism going on with the court in terms of our expectations, but you have to wonder, how does that impact then the kind of decisions that they make? This might be why amicus curiae briefs are becoming increasingly important and why they rely on them, because that might give them a snapshot of more what the population feels versus what their experience shows them. Okay? So I wanted to show you, we want to talk through some of the issues then about judicial decision making. Some of these words are misused, and so it's really important to me that you understand the difference. Okay? When a justice approaches decision making, most of them have a philosophy. They have an idea of like, how do I look at the Constitution? How do I look at a law? And how do I arrive at a decision? So if you prescribe to original intent theory, judicial restraint, or strict constructionism, that kind of all goes together. Okay? If you watch the news or you listen to political commentary, they're going to tell you that's being conservative. That is not true. Okay? Don't do that. I would really like it if you would not call justices liberal and conservative, because that's really not appropriate, because what we're doing is we're trying to understand how do they arrive at their decision making. A justice who exercises these kind of ideas asks themselves, what would the framers do? So like those little bracelets, what would James Madison do? What did he mean? Okay, where would you look to know what James Madison meant?
The Constitution.
And then the Federalist Papers, right? Because that's where they explain their arguments. That was a good little squeal, wasn't it? You can look at history. Okay, so let me give you an example. Brian, you brought up Roe versus Wade earlier. There was a decision when Chief Justice Rehnquist, when he was on the court, there was a decision which in effect would have allowed them to overturn a portion of Roe versus Wade involving abortion. And he dissented, so the decision upheld Roe v. Wade, and he wrote the dissent, and his dissent is so interesting to read, because what he talks about is he's trying to decide, does the Ninth Amendment protect the right of abortion? And he said, well, it says there are unenumerated rights, so what did the framers mean by unenumerated rights? He says, well, let's go back to the history in 1787. Was abortion a right that some people had in the states back in that time? Is that what the framers meant? And he said, examining history, I can see it's not there. So no, so he is exercising judicial restraint. He's not trying to read into it, okay? Justice Scalia wrote a concurrence to his dissent, and he is literal. He's not with us anymore, but he would say there are no unenumerated rights. For him, it's not written down, it's black and white. And he took a very strict view, like super, super strict constructionism. Justice Thomas is like that. Justice O'Connor wrote the majority opinion, where she basically says, look, we've got to look at the Constitution in light of the fact that it was in the 2000s. I don't remember what year the case was. You've got to look at it in light of today. And so she takes a more activist approach in a lot of ways, because she's reading into the document, and then she's interpreting it in light of the experiences and the things that we have today. Have you heard those phrases like having a living constitution? Okay, that's what this is relating to. If you were an activist judge, you put your own political spin on something, or you stray from precedent. Okay, so I'm going to give you another example though to show you why conservative doesn't fit with restraint. Have you guys heard of the Miranda versus Arizona decision?
Yes.
Okay, what did Miranda versus Arizona do?
Was that the gun?
Miranda rights. Like on TV, when somebody gets arrested, you have a right to remain silent. Okay, so if you read in the Constitution, it does not say that if somebody is arrested, they have to be advised of their rights. That happened as a result of Miranda versus Arizona. In that decision, what they wrote back in the 50s, I think it was 50s or 60s, 60s, they said that it's inherent in police tactics to try to coerce you and to try to basically get you to testify. So in our system, we want to make sure that the accused are advised of their rights, and that's where the whole Miranda warning was established. So William Rehnquist, who will eventually serve on the Supreme Court, is working in the Department of Justice at the time. And as a person in the Department of Justice, he's mad. It's like, this is a terrible decision. And he actually wrote papers on it, like publicly. He spoke about it. This is a bad decision. You've hampered the police. You have tied up our government. Okay? Now flash forward to the 2000s. Justice Rehnquist is sitting on the court. He's been on the court for like 2 decades. He is the Chief Justice. And there is a case that comes to him where he basically has the opportunity to overturn the Miranda warning. 20-something years later, it would like do away with that. And he writes the majority opinion, which sustains Miranda and keeps it there. And in his argument, he said, in his words, Miranda is part of our national culture. So even though 30 years ago it was an activist decision and it was reading into the Constitution and it was establishing things that weren't there, it is now part of our Constitution because it has been there so long. So for him to overturn that decision would have been activist. Does that make sense? So you can be a conservative justice and be activist. If you are as a justice saying, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to overturn Roe versus Wade, that is an activist decision because Roe versus Wade has been the law of this country since the 70s. I am not telling you that one is right and one is wrong. There's not a right and a wrong. There is an attitude towards judicial philosophy. So I always think like the best way to think about activism and restraint, most religions have some kind of text, right, that they use to guide their religion. Some people, whenever they look at that text, they read it and they say, this is the word of my God. I do what these words say. That is a more restrained approach. That is a strict constructionist approach. A person that says, this is a good guideline for how to live my life, but it was written in a different time period, so I have to adjust it, takes an activist approach. And like everything, you guys, it's on a continuum. Justice Thomas is consistently restrained, over and over and over. Justice Kennedy goes both ways. Sometimes he makes decisions that look a little more like this, sometimes a little more like that. Justice Ginsburg, and this is not why I love her, I just love her because she is feisty, and I just think it's so cool. She is way more activist, and she doesn't apologize. You're going to see her in a video in a minute, and she's going to say, we don't have the same Constitution that we had in 1787, because in her mind, the world is so different. And so none of us, and here's what I love about it, though. In Congress, when we have these different attitudes, what happens as a result of that? Conflict, nothing happens, right? We have gridlock, we have conflict, we have government shutdown. We don't see that on the court. Justice Scalia, who passed away last year, was probably the most restrained justice to have sat on the court, as far as I know. Ginsburg is super activist, and they're like best friends. They took vacations together. I mean, they're both married, but they would it's so cool. And there is a real level of respect. So it's interesting to see how you can have such divergent opinions, but it's not about politics. And the politics has been removed because public opinion is not a part of it. Okay? All right, so here's what we're going to do now. We're going to do some practicing. I am going to give you guys a summary of a case called Tinker versus Des Moines. You remember that?
Yeah.
Mary Beth Tinker? Okay. All right, I chose that because I know it's one that you learn in U.S. history, and you tend to remember it pretty well. So what you've got is you have brief facts of the case, and then you have a summary of the decision. This is not the whole decision. The whole decision is like 80 pages, okay? This is summary of it. So you've got the summary of the decision. In that summary, you're also going to have like dissenting and concurrent and all that kind of stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you guys a copy of this, and you can write on it. I'll bring you some markers. I want you to look for examples of all of these words. We should have learned these. So I want to make sure that you can find original jurisdiction happening, appellate jurisdiction, district, etc. So you can find it in multiple places, so you just mark it. And anything you can't find or you don't know what it is,